Shadow Guard to me, now." The command came from Christopher Nightshade himself, sharp and absolute, the kind of order that had shattered rebellions and brought warlords to their knees. But the 12 elite warriors of the Shadow Guard did not move. They stood frozen, their bodies rigid as stone, their eyes locked, not on their king, but on the small, silent figure weaving through the crowd 30 paces away. Catherine did not speak. She had never raised her voice above a whisper in her entire life. But when she approached the archway where 2 guards blocked her path and lifted her gaze, just for a heartbeat, those 2 warriors stepped aside as one. Then 4 more. Then all 12, their boots scraping against cobblestone in perfect, eerie unison as they parted like a living corridor, leaving their king standing alone in the center of the torchlit courtyard. The silence that followed was suffocating. Christopher Nightshade, Alpha King of the 7 territories, unifier of warring packs and commander of the most powerful wolves in existence, watched as his own blood-sworn guard obeyed a servant girl who had not uttered a single sound. His wolf surged forward in his chest, not with rage, but with something far more ancient. Recognition. The kind that made his blood ignite and his very soul tremble with a hunger he had never known before. He saw it then, the faint shimmer of silver threading across her left wrist as she passed beneath the torchlight. A mark that should not exist in this world. A mark that had been extinct for 300 years. This was impossible. This was dangerous. This was destiny. And every instinct in his body screamed one word: mine. Chapter 1. The door to the chamber closed with a finality that made Catherine's pulse spike. She'd been escorted, no, commanded, to follow Christopher's second through corridors she'd only ever cleaned, never walked as anything other than invisible. Now she stood in a room that smelled of leather and smoke and something wild she couldn't name, and the Alpha King stood between her and the only exit. "Your wrist," he said, his voice quieter than it had been in the courtyard, but no less absolute. "Show me." Catherine's fingers trembled as she pulled back the frayed edge of her sleeve. She'd always kept the mark hidden, a habit born from her mother's dying whisper. Never let them see. But there was no refusing him. Not here. Not now. The silver threads gleamed in the firelight, delicate as spider silk, weaving patterns that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. Christopher's breath caught. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, and before she could retreat, his fingers circled her wrist, not roughly, but with a reverence that terrified her more than force ever could. "Do you know what this is?" His thumb traced the outer edge of the mark, and Catherine felt something wake beneath her skin, something that hummed in response to his touch. She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "You're silent-born." The word fell between them like a stone into still water. A bloodline that ruled alongside alphas when the world was young. We commanded through dominance, through the roar and the hunt. Your ancestors commanded through intention, through will made manifest. His eyes, gold and burning, lifted to hers. They didn't need to speak. They didn't need to shift. They simply wanted the world to obey, and it had no choice but to listen. Catherine's throat closed. "That's not possible. I'm nobody. I'm just the last of your kind." His grip tightened, anchoring her when she would have pulled away. The silent-born were hunted to extinction 3 centuries ago, slaughtered by those who feared a power they couldn't understand, couldn't control. His jaw clenched. "But you're here. You survived. And what you did in that courtyard, moving my shadow guard without a word, without even knowing what you were doing, that wasn't luck, Catherine. That was legacy." The name on his lips felt like a brand. She'd been called girl, servant, thing. Never Catherine. Never like she mattered. "I don't want this," she whispered, and hated how small she sounded. Christopher's expression shifted, something almost gentle breaking through the iron. "I know, but want has nothing to do with what you are." He released her wrist, stepping back, though his gaze never left hers. "The question is whether you'll let fear destroy you, or whether you'll learn to wield the power that's already in your blood." Outside, thunder rumbled. Inside, Catherine felt the web stir, every wolf in the territory turning toward her like flowers toward the sun. She was terrified. She was awake. And there was no going back. Chapter 2. The great hall glittered with enough wealth to feed Catherine's entire village for a year. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across silk gowns and polished armor, across faces that turned toward her with curiosity, contempt, or calculation as Christopher led her to the high table. She'd been given a dress, midnight blue velvet that felt like sin against her skin, but no amount of fine clothing could hide what she was. What she'd always been. A servant pretending to be something more. "The Alpha King honors us with unusual company tonight." The voice cut through the murmur of conversation like a blade through silk. Lady Seraphina rose from her seat 3 places down, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. She was beautiful the way winter was beautiful, cold and merciless and adorned with diamonds that caught the light like shards of ice. "Tell me, dear, do you even know which fork to use? Or shall we assign you a tutor in basic etiquette?" Laughter rippled down. The table. Catherine's fingers curled in her lap, nails biting into her palms. She felt Christopher go still beside her, a predator's stillness that made the air itself hold its breath. "Or perhaps," Seraphina continued, her eyes glittering with malice, "we should return you to the kitchens where you belong. I'm certain the staff is missing their... What was it you did? Scrubbed floors?" She turned to the nobleman beside her with mock concern. "It seems such a waste to seat her here when there are chamber pots that need emptying." The words landed like stones. Catherine had survived years of cruelty, had learned to make herself small enough that insults passed through her like she was made of smoke. But this public flaying, was different. This was theater. This was a warning wrapped in silk and venom. "Careful, Seraphina." Christopher's voice was soft, deadly. "You're addressing my guest. Your guest." Seraphina's laugh was musical and poisonous. "Is that what we're calling her? How quaint." "My Lord King." Lord Matthias leaned in from Christopher's other side, his voice pitched for privacy, but just loud enough for Catherine to hear. The advisor's face was a mask of concern, but his eyes held something colder. "Forgive my candor, but the court is unsettled. This girl's presence raises questions. Dangerous questions." He paused, letting the weight settle. "There are those who would see her as a weapon, others as a threat. Either way, she's a liability you cannot afford." Christopher's hand found Catherine's beneath the table, his grip warm and grounding, even as fury radiated from him in waves. "Then they misunderstand the situation entirely." "Do they?" Matthias pressed, his tone carefully measured. "Her bloodline was exterminated for a reason, Your Majesty. The Silent-born were powerful, yes, but they were also unstable, uncontrollable. How long before she compels the wrong wolf? Before she destabilizes everything you've built?" Catherine wanted to disappear, wanted to sink through the floor and never resurface. Every eye in the hall was on her now, weighing her, judging her, finding her wanting. Christopher stood. The conversation died instantly. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. The sheer force of his presence commanded the room more thoroughly than any shout ever could. "Let me make something abundantly clear." His words fell like hammer strikes. "Catherine is under my personal protection. Any insult to her is an insult to me. Any threat against her is a declaration of war." His gaze swept the table, lingering on Seraphina, on Matthias, on every face that had dared to sneer. She is Silent-born. She is the last of a royal bloodline that predates every pack in this room. And she is mine. The declaration hit like thunder. Seraphina's smile froze, her knuckles white around her wineglass. Matthias's expression flickered, something dark and calculating passing behind his eyes before he bowed his head in apparent submission. "As you command, my king," the advisor murmured. But Catherine heard the lie beneath the words. Heard it in the sudden spike of hostile intention that rippled through the web like blood in water. Christopher had just painted a target on her back, and every predator in the room was now circling. Chapter 3. Catherine couldn't sleep. The guest chambers Christopher had assigned her were more luxurious than anywhere she'd ever laid her head. Silk sheets, carved mahogany, a fireplace that bathed the room in amber warmth. But luxury couldn't silence the noise in her skull. It had started during dinner. A low hum, like distant music, played on an instrument she'd never heard. At first, she'd thought it was the wine, or shock, or the weight of too many eyes watching her stumble through a world she didn't understand. But the sound hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown stronger, more distinct, until she realized it wasn't a sound at all. It was awareness. She could feel them. Every wolf in the fortress, maybe beyond. Hundreds of consciousnesses humming just beneath the surface of reality, like stars behind clouds. She didn't see them with her eyes. She sensed them the way she might sense someone standing behind her in the dark. Presence without form, intention without words. A guard on the eastern wall, bored and cold. A servant in the scullery, exhausted and resentful. Two warriors sparring in the training yard, their competitive joy blazing like small suns. The threads of light, silver and shimmering, connected them all in a web so vast and intricate, it made her dizzy to perceive it. And then she felt something else, something sharp and acidic, cutting through the tapestry like a blade. Hatred. Catherine sat up, her heart hammering. The feeling was close, too close, and growing closer. She focused on the thread, following it through the web with an instinct she didn't understand, and felt the presence crystallize. A woman. Moving through the corridors, outside her door with deliberate, measured steps. In her hand, something small and cold and lethal. Poison. The knowledge arrived without thought, without question, simply known the way she knew her own name. Catherine stumbled out of bed, her bare feet silent on the stone floor. She didn't think, didn't plan. She simply reached for the door and pulled it open just as the servant raised her hand to knock. The woman froze. She was young, Catherine's age or near to it, with dark hair and hollow eyes that held no remorse, only cold determination. "I brought you tea, my lady," the servant said, her voice flat. Rehearsed. In her other hand, tucked behind her back, Catherine felt the vial, a tiny glass cylinder filled with liquid death. The woman's intention was a scream in the web. Pour it in the cup, watch her drink, collect the payment from Lady Seraphina. "You don't want to do this," Catherine whispered. The servant's eyes flickered. Confusion, then resistance. I don't know. What you... Drop it." The command left Catherine's lips before she realized she was speaking. It wasn't loud, it wasn't forceful. It simply was, a statement of fact, a rewriting of reality itself. The servant's fingers spasmed open, and the vial tumbled from her grip, shattering against the stone floor. Clear liquid spread across the flagstones, eating into the grout with a hiss that confirmed what Catherine had already known. The woman stared at her empty hand, trembling. How did you... Catherine felt the compulsion still thrumming in the air between them, felt how easy it would be to reach deeper, to make the woman forget, to command her to walk into Seraphina's chambers and deliver the poison back to its source. The power was there, waiting, hungry, terrifying. "Go," Catherine said instead, her voice shaking. "Leave, now, and don't come back." The servant fled. Catherine sagged against the doorframe, her legs suddenly weak. In the web, she felt Christopher jolt, awake 3 floors above, his attention snapping toward her like a compass finding north. Felt Matthias's interest sharpen in his study. Felt Seraphina's fury ignite like wildfire when the servant burst into her chambers with trembling hands and a story about eyes that could command souls. The hum beneath the world grew louder, and Catherine realized with dawning horror that she'd just announced to every wolf in the fortress exactly what she could do. There would be no hiding now. Chapter 4. The forest road was supposed to be safe. Christopher had assured her of it that morning, as they had prepared to return to Nightbourne Fortress, his main stronghold, where she'd be better protected from enemies who now knew her face and feared her power. The Shadow Guard rode in formation around the carriage, alert but not alarmed, their confidence absolute. That confidence shattered with the first howl. It came from everywhere and nowhere, a sound that didn't belong to any natural wolf. Too deep, too hollow, like something dead had learned to scream. The horses reared, eyes rolling white with terror, and then the trees exploded with movement. They poured from the shadows like liquid night, wolves that shouldn't exist. Their fur absorbed light rather than reflected it, their eyes burning with a sickly green phosphorescence that had nothing to do with life. Shadow wolves. Catherine had heard whispers of them in the servants' quarters, stories told to frighten children. Creatures bred in darkness by mages who'd twisted nature into something obscene. Beasts immune to alpha commands, loyal only to whoever held their leash. Shadow Guard, defensive formation! Christopher's voice cracked like a whip as he vaulted from the carriage, his body already shifting mid-leap. Bone and muscle reformed in a blur of motion, and where a man had been, a massive black wolf now stood, larger than any natural animal, his eyes burning gold with alpha authority. His warriors shifted with him, forming a living wall between the carriage and the attackers. Christopher's command rolled out like thunder. Stand down! The shadow wolves didn't even slow. Catherine watched in horror as the alpha command, the force that should have dropped the creatures in their tracks, washed over them like water over stone. They kept coming, 15 strong, moving with coordinated precision that spoke of training, of purpose. This wasn't a random attack. This was an execution. Christopher crashed into the first wolf with bone-crushing force, his jaws finding its throat. The Shadow Guard engaged as one, their formation perfect, their skill undeniable. But skill meant nothing when the enemy couldn't be commanded, couldn't be cowed. The Shadow Wolves fought without fear, without hesitation, and Catherine felt the moment the tide began to turn. A warrior went down, his scream cut short. Then another. Christopher was surrounded, 3 shadow wolves circling him, looking for an opening. His power radiated from him in waves, enough to bring a small army to its knees. But these creatures were deaf to it, blind to it. They'd been made for this exact purpose, to kill what couldn't be killed. No, the word ignited in Catherine's mind like a star going nova. She didn't think, didn't plan. She simply reached for the web, that vast network of consciousness she'd been too afraid to touch, and pulled. The world screamed. Every thread lit up at once, silver turning to white-hot gold, as power she didn't understand flooded through her. She felt every wolf, shadow and true alike, caught in her awareness like flies in amber. She felt their confusion, their rage, their terror. And beneath it all, she felt the wrongness of the shadow wolves, the twisted magic that bound them to masters who'd perverted their very souls. Stop. The command didn't leave her lips. It didn't need to. It simply expanded from her in a wave of absolute will, rewriting reality itself in the space between heartbeats. 15. Shadow wolves froze mid-leap, mid-strike, mid-breath, suspended in the air as if time itself had forgotten how to move forward. Their eyes remained lit with that sickly green fire, but their bodies were Catherine's now, held by an intention so pure, so absolute, that even corrupted magic had no choice but to obey. The silence was total. Christopher shifted back to human form, blood streaming from a dozen wounds, his chest heaving. He stared at the frozen tableau, at his enemies suspended like insects in glass, and then his gaze found Catherine. She stood in the carriage doorway, one hand braced against the frame, the other extended toward the wolves. Silver light bled from her wrist, from her eyes, crawling across her skin in patterns that mirrored the marks she'd tried so hard to hide. Catherine! The world tilted. Her knees buckled, and she felt the barrier shatter as consciousness fled. The last thing she heard was Christopher's roar, not of rage, but of terror, as he caught her before she hit the ground. The shadow wolves, freed from her hold, scattered into the trees like smoke. But the message had been delivered. Catherine wasn't just Silentborn. She was a weapon. And now everyone knew it. Chapter 5. Catherine woke to the sound of arguing. Not the polite disagreements of nobility, but voices raised in genuine fury, echoing through stone corridors that spoke of Christopher's main fortress. She'd been unconscious for 2 days, she learned later. 2 days during which the supernatural world had fractured along fault lines she'd inadvertently exposed. A servant helped her dress in clothes that felt like armor, deep emerald silk reinforced with silver threading that caught the light like her mark. When Catherine emerged from her chambers, a guard escorted her not to a private room, but to the grand hall where every noble house in the 7 territories had assembled. Christopher stood at the center of the dais, still bearing the marks of battle, bandages, visible beneath his formal attire, a cut along his jaw that would scar. When Catherine entered, his eyes found hers across the sea of faces, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Determination. And something that looked dangerously like possession. Catherine! He extended his hand, a command and an invitation all at once. The crowd parted like water, their silence heavy with judgment. She felt hundreds of eyes tracking her movement, felt the web pulse with curiosity, fear, hunger. When she reached the dais, Christopher took her hand and pulled her up beside him, where a queen would stand. I have called you here to witness a truth that can no longer be denied. Christopher's voice carried to every corner of the hall, absolute and uncompromising. 2 nights ago, this woman saved my life and the lives of my shadow guard using power that hasn't existed in this world for 3 centuries. She is Silentborn. She is the last of a royal bloodline that once stood as our equals. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Catherine felt the emotions crashing against her through the web. Shock, awe, resentment, fear. But there is more. Christopher's grip on her hand tightened. The bond between alpha and mate is not a choice. It is recognition. When wolf calls to wolf across the void of souls, there is no denying it. No refusing it. He turned to face her fully, and Catherine saw in his eyes a vulnerability that terrified her more than any declaration. Catherine is my fated mate, and I claim her before all witnesses as my queen. The hall exploded. This is madness! Lord Harwick surged to his feet, his face purple with rage. She's a servant, a nobody. You would elevate her above bloodlines that have served for centuries? I would elevate my mate, Christopher said, his voice dropping to something deadly. Are you suggesting I deny what fate itself has decreed? I'm suggesting, Harwick sputtered, but others were already shouting. The old ways are dead, a younger voice called out. Lady Morgana, Catherine realized, one of the progressive faction leaders. If the Alpha King has found his mate in a Silentborn, perhaps it's a sign, a new era. A sign of weakness, another voice. He's been bewitched, compelled by the very power he claims to protect us from. The accusations flew like arrows. Catherine stood frozen, Christopher's hand the only thing anchoring her to reality, as the court tore itself apart around her. She felt it all through the web, the genuine support from some, the calculating ambition from others, the pure hatred from those who saw her as a threat to everything they'd built their lives upon. And then she felt Seraphina. The noblewoman stood in the back of the hall, her face a mask of serene acceptance. But in the web, her intention burned like acid. Catherine watched as Seraphina turned and slipped through a side entrance, felt the moment she pulled Lord Matthias into a shadowed alcove. Their conversation was too far to hear with ears, but Catherine didn't need ears. The web carried their intentions like blood in water. She's made him vulnerable, exposed. Then we remove the vulnerability. Can it be done quietly? Does it matter? Once she's dead, he'll have no choice but to move forward. Perhaps even thank us for removing the distraction. When? The bonding ceremony, 3 days hence. She'll be isolated, vulnerable. It will look like an accident, a tragedy. Catherine's blood turned to ice. Christopher was still addressing the court, declaring policies, making pronouncements about acceptance and tradition and the future of the territories. He didn't feel what she felt, didn't sense the conspiracy taking shape in the shadows like a noose tightening around both their throats. Serafina returned to the hall, her smile perfect and poisonous. She caught Catherine's gaze across the crowd and raised her wine glass in a mock toast. 3 days, her expression promised. Enjoy them. Chapter 6, The Pain, started at midnight. Catherine had felt it building all evening, a restless energy beneath her skin, a wrongness in her bones that made her want to crawl out of her own body. Christopher had insisted she stay in his private chambers after the assembly, claiming it was safer. She suspected he simply couldn't bear to let her out of his sight. Now she understood why wolves shifted during heightened emotion. The transformation wasn't a choice. It was an inevitability, a pressure building until the body surrendered or shattered. Christopher. His name left her lips as a gasp. He was at her side instantly, his hand finding hers. Something's wrong. I can't. You're shifting. His voice was steady, but she felt his alarm through the web. It's all right. I'm here. I won't leave you. I've never. The words dissolved into a scream as her spine arched, bones beginning to reshape themselves. This was nothing like the transformations she'd witnessed. Those had been fluid, natural, beautiful in their violence. This felt like being unmade at the molecular level. Her skin began to glow. Christopher swore, stumbling backward as silver light bled from every pore, from the mark on her wrist spreading like wildfire across her entire body. It wasn't painful, the light itself, but what it represented terrified her. She was coming apart, dissolving, her human form fragmenting into something that shouldn't exist. Catherine, look at me. Christopher's voice cut through her panic. He'd shifted to his wolf form, his massive black frame radiating calm authority. Don't fight it. Let it happen. Trust your blood. She wanted to argue, wanted to claw her way back to human and safe and known. But the transformation was inevitable as a tidal wave, and she was drowning in silver light that tasted like moonlight and ancient things. Her bones liquefied and reformed. Her senses exploded outward. She could hear Christopher's heartbeat, smell the lingering fear on his skin, feel the presence of every living thing in the fortress, like stars mapped across her consciousness. The web didn't hum anymore. It sang, each thread a note in a symphony so complex it should have driven her mad. And then she was standing on 4 legs that weren't quite solid. Catherine looked down at herself and couldn't comprehend what she saw. She had paws, or the shape of paws, but they seemed to exist in multiple states at once. Solid, then translucent, then pure light, cycling through forms as if reality couldn't quite decide what she was. Her fur, if it could be called fur, rippled like liquid silver, each strand glowing with its own internal luminescence. When she moved, she left traces of light in the air like brushstrokes on canvas. She was beautiful. She was impossible. She was terrifying. Christopher circled her slowly, his golden eyes wide with something between awe and reverence. When he brushed against her flank, his solid black form contrasting with her ethereal, silver, she felt the connection snap into place with devastating finality. The mate bond, incomplete until now, roared to life, a bridge between souls that made the web look like a child's toy in comparison. You're not just silent-born, his thought arrived crystal clear through their bond. You're something the legends didn't even have words for. Catherine tried to respond and discovered she could move through solid matter. Her paw passed through the edge of Christopher's desk like it was made of smoke, the wood rippling but unharmed. She jerked back, terrified, and felt Christopher's steadying presence in her mind. Breathe. You exist between states, physical and pure intention. You're bridging the gap between what is and what could be. She took a tentative step and felt herself shift, not just physically, but dimensionally. For a heartbeat, she existed in two places at once, standing before Christopher and also 3 feet to the left, as if her consciousness could choose which version of reality to inhabit. This is why they killed us, Catherine realized, the knowledge arriving with terrible clarity. We weren't just powerful, we were incomprehensible. We broke the rules that govern existence itself. Christopher shifted back to human, his naked form unself-conscious as he knelt before her wolf. They killed you because they were afraid. Because power like this can't be controlled, only chosen. He reached out slowly, his hand passing through her shoulder before she solidified enough for him to touch. The question is, what will you choose to do with it? Catherine felt the web pulse around her, felt every wolf in the territories turn toward her like flowers toward the sun. She could command them all right now, could reach into their minds and make them her puppets, could reshape reality itself if she just pushed hard enough. The temptation was intoxicating, horrifying. She shifted back to human in a cascade of silver light, collapsing into Christopher's arms as her mortal form reasserted itself. Her body shook with exhaustion and residual power, but her mind had never been clearer. I choose you, she whispered against his chest. I choose us. I choose to protect, not dominate. Christopher's arms tightened around her. In the web, she felt his wolf howl with triumph and relief. But she also felt Seraphina, 2 floors below, sense the surge of power and smile. The clock was ticking, and Catherine had just shown her enemy exactly how dangerous she'd become. Chapter 7. Sleep wouldn't come. Catherine lay in Christopher's bed, their bed now after the transformation had sealed something irreversible between them, listening to his steady breathing and the fortress settling into its midnight rhythms. But beneath the ordinary sounds, the web hummed with wrongness. She'd learned to read its currents over the past 3 days, learned to distinguish between normal anxiety and malicious intent, between ambition and genuine threat. What she felt now was a spike of dark purpose, sharp and focused, emanating from the east wing, where the noble guest quarters sprawled like a labyrinth. Seraphina, and someone else. Someone whose presence in the web felt like oil on water, there but not there, as if part of him had learned to hide from silent-born senses. Catherine slipped from the bed, her bare feet silent on cold stone. She didn't wake Christopher. Whatever was happening, she needed to understand it first, needed proof before she made accusations that could fracture his court beyond repair. The transformation came easier this time. She thought of her wolf form and felt reality bend to accommodate her, flesh becoming liquid silver light that could slip through shadows like smoke. In this state, she was nearly invisible, a ghost made of moonlight and intention. She flowed through the fortress like water finding cracks, following the thread of malice through corridors she'd never walked. The web guided her, each wolf's presence a beacon she could navigate by. When she reached the east wing, she felt them. Seraphina and Lord Matthias, their consciousnesses burning with conspiracy in a private study sealed by magic that should have prevented eavesdropping. Should have. But Catherine wasn't bound by the same rules as other wolves. She slipped through the door like light through a keyhole, her ethereal form solidifying just enough to perceive the room with all her senses. They sat by the fireplace, wine glasses abandoned, their voices low and urgent. Cannot wait any longer. Seraphina paced like a caged predator, her elegant gown whispering against the floor. She grows stronger every day. Did you feel what she did tonight? That transformation wasn't natural. She's becoming something we can't control. The Covenant is aware. Matthias remained seated, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. In the firelight, Catherine saw something she'd missed before, a faint mark on the inside of his wrist, visible only, when he moved his hand a certain way. 3 overlapping circles, the symbol of the Shadow Covenant. They're prepared to move, but they need assurances that Christopher can be managed. Managed. Serafina laughed, bitter and sharp. You mean eliminated? If necessary. Matthias's voice held no emotion. The king has become a liability. His obsession with the girl blinds him to the broader picture. A unified territory was always meant to be temporary, a stepping stone to something greater. But he's grown sentimental, weak. Catherine's wolf form rippled with rage. She forced herself to remain still, to listen, even as every instinct screamed to tear out his throat. The bonding ceremony is in 2 days, Serafina said. We strike then. The covenant will provide the weapon, something that will kill her even in her wolf form. When Christopher finds her body, we'll ensure the evidence points to, let's say, a faction of traditionalist nobles who oppose the match. He'll go to war. Matthias nodded slowly, as if considering a chess move. Against his own people, the territories will fracture, and in the chaos, the covenant sweeps in as peacemakers, Serafina smiled, offering unity under a new structure, one that doesn't include silent-born abominations or sentimental alpha kings who've forgotten their purpose. And you get your throne. Matthias raised his wine glass in mock salute. Queen Serafina. It has a certain ring to it. Co-ruler, she corrected sharply. The covenant doesn't grant power for free. But yes, a throne without the complication of a fated mate, without the weakness of love. Catherine felt the word like a blade. Christopher loved her. She'd felt it through their bond, even if he hadn't said it aloud. And these vipers planned to use that love to destroy everything he'd built. Matthias stood, rolling up his sleeve to reveal the covenant mark fully. It wasn't a tattoo. It pulsed with sickly green light, the same color as the shadow, wolves' eyes. I'll make the arrangements. The weapon will be delivered tomorrow night. Untraceable, unstoppable. He paused at the door. And Catherine? Serafina's head snapped up. What about her? If she somehow survives the first attempt, we have contingencies. The Covenant has been hunting Silentborn for 300 years. They know how to kill what shouldn't be killed. The door closed behind him. Catherine remained frozen, her silver form trembling with fury and fear. She'd found her proof, found the rot at the heart of Christopher's court. But she'd also found something worse. Confirmation that the Shadow Covenant, the ancient faction that had exterminated her entire bloodline, was still active, still hunting, and now they knew exactly where to find her. Serafina moved to the window, staring out at the moonlit courtyard where the bonding ceremony would take place in 48 hours. Enjoy your last days, little ghost, she whispered to her reflection. You should have stayed invisible. Catherine slipped from the room like a shadow fleeing dawn. Her mind raced as she flowed back through the fortress. She had to tell Christopher, had to warn him about Matthias, about the Covenant, about the weapon that was already on its way. But as she reached their chambers and shifted back to human form, she realized the terrible truth. Christopher would cancel the ceremony, would lock her away to keep her safe, would fracture his own court trying to root out traitors while the Covenant watched and waited for another opportunity. Unless she gave them what they wanted, unless she walked into the trap, and turned it into a battleground of her choosing. Catherine's hand found the silver mark on her wrist, tracing the threads that proved she was the last of her kind. Maybe it was time to show the Shadow Covenant why her ancestors had been so terrifying that they'd needed 3 centuries to feel safe enough to hunt again. 2 days until the ceremony. 2 days to prepare for war. Chapter 8. Catherine found Elena in the Forbidden Archives, where Christopher had admitted only one other living soul resided. A scholar so old that even the Alpha Kings spoke of her with reverence. The woman sat surrounded by scrolls that crumbled at the edges, her silver hair cascading down her back like a waterfall of moonlight. When Catherine entered, Elena didn't look up. "I wondered how long it would take you to seek me out." Her voice carried the weight of centuries. Most Silentborn can feel each other across vast distances. But you're young, untrained. You probably mistook me for another thread in your web. Catherine's breath caught. "You're the last." Elena finally raised her eyes, and Catherine saw they were the same shade as her own, gray like storm clouds, with silver flecks that caught the candlelight. "Or I was, until you decided to announce yourself by freezing shadow wolves in midair and transforming into living starlight." A faint smile touched her lips. Subtlety was never our bloodline's strength. Christopher never mentioned that he's been hiding me for 50 years? No, he wouldn't. The fewer who know I exist, the safer I remain. Elena gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit, child. We have much to discuss and very little time." I felt the conspiracy forming in the web. Felt you discover it. You plan to walk into their trap. It wasn't a question. Catherine sank into the chair, her exhaustion suddenly overwhelming. "I can't let them hurt Christopher. Can't let them use me to destroy everything he's built." "So you'll sacrifice yourself instead?" Elena's gaze was sharp, noble, foolish, and entirely unnecessary if you actually understood what you are. "I'm Silentborn. I can command wolves without speaking. You can do so much more than command." Elena leaned forward, her intensity fierce. "That's what they wanted everyone to believe. That we were tyrants, controllers, monsters who bent the world to our will through force." She pressed her hand to Catherine's chest, right over her heart. "But that was never the truth. We were weavers, Catherine. We didn't dominate the web. We harmonized it." Catherine felt something shift in her understanding, like a puzzle piece clicking into place. "I don't understand." Elena stood, moving to the window where moonlight streamed through ancient glass. "Every wolf is connected through the web. You felt it. A network of consciousness, emotion, intention. But it's chaotic, discordant. Each thread pulling in its own direction, creating friction and conflict. The alphas control through dominance, forcing obedience through raw power." She turned back to Catherine. "We controlled through unity. We could take 1,000 disparate threads and weave them into a single tapestry. Not by forcing them, but by showing them the pattern they were always meant to form. I don't know how to do that. Because you're still trying to command, to push, to force your will onto others." Elena returned to her seat, taking Catherine's hands in her own. Her skin was warm, alive with the same silver light that Catherine carried. "Close your eyes. Feel the web. Not as something to control, but as something to join." Catherine obeyed, sinking into the vast network of consciousness that surrounded her. She felt the fortress wolves, guards on patrol, servants sleeping, nobles dreaming. She felt Christopher 3 floors above, restless with worry. Felt Seraphina's cold ambition and Matthias's calculated treachery. "Now listen," Elena whispered. "Really listen. Not to their thoughts, but to their hearts. What do they want? What do they fear? What do they need?" The web opened like a flower. Catherine gasped as she felt not just presence, but purpose. The guard wanted to protect his family. The servant wanted dignity. The noble wanted legacy. Even Seraphina, beneath her spite, wanted to matter, to be more than beautiful and ambitious and ultimately disposable. "They're all afraid," Catherine breathed. "Everyone is afraid. Fear is the poison that turns the web toxic. But you," Elena squeezed her hands, "you can transmute it, can take that fear and show them something better. Not through force, through connection." Catherine opened her eyes. "The Covenant will come for me at the ceremony, with a weapon designed to kill Silentborn. Yes, Christopher will try to stop them. People will die. unless you weave them together first. Elena's smile was sad and knowing. 1,000 wolves, all moving as one. Not because you commanded them, but because you showed them the truth. That they're stronger together than afraid and divided. That's the power the Covenant truly fears. Not your ability to control, but your ability to unite. I've never done anything like that. You froze 15 shadow wolves through pure will. You exist in multiple states of reality simultaneously. You are learning to rewrite the rules of existence itself. Elena stood, pulling Catherine to her feet. The ceremony is tomorrow night. Between now and then, I will teach you to truly listen, to truly weave. And when the Covenant comes, I'll show them why they spent 3 centuries afraid to face us. Elena's eyes gleamed. Now you're beginning to understand. The Silent-born weren't hunted because we were tyrants. We were hunted because we could make their weapons obsolete, could turn their armies into communities, could show the world that power built on fear was nothing compared to power built on belonging. Through the web, Catherine felt Christopher's approach, his relief at finding her safe, his curiosity about the old woman whose existence he'd kept secret even from his mate. She felt the fortress settling into its pre-dawn rhythms, unaware that tomorrow would rewrite their world. And beneath it all, she felt the Covenant's weapon drawing closer. Felt its wrongness like a cancer in the web. A thing designed to sever rather than connect. Let them come. She was done hiding, done being afraid. The Silent Queen was learning to speak, not with words, but with something far more powerful. With truth that made lies impossible. With unity that made division unthinkable. With belonging that made fear obsolete. 24 hours until the ceremony. 24 hours to learn how to save everyone. Or die trying. Chapter 9. The sacred chamber glowed with moonlight filtering through crystalline windows, each beam illuminating the ancient runes carved into stone floors. Catherine stood at the center in a gown of silver silk that seemed woven from starlight itself, Christopher across from her in ceremonial black. Between them, the priestess began the rite that would bind their souls for eternity. Catherine felt the moment the doors burst open before she heard it. The web screamed with violence. 50 mercenaries flooded the chamber, wolves corrupted by Covenant magic, their eyes burning with that familiar sickly green. Seraphina strode in behind them, beautiful and terrible in crimson armor, a blade of shadow-forged steel in her hand. "How touching," she called out, her voice echoing off stone. "But I'm afraid this ceremony is canceled." Christopher shifted instantly, his massive black wolf form placing itself between Catherine and the threat. His shadow guard materialized from the alcoves, forming a defensive wall. But Catherine felt the wrongness. Half of them had been compromised. Their threads in the web twisted with Covenant influence. "Matthias sends his regards," Seraphina continued, and then the advisor himself appeared, the Covenant mark on his wrist blazing with power. "He's currently ensuring your loyal forces remain occupied." The battle erupted with brutal efficiency. Christopher's roar shook the foundations as he crashed into Matthias. The two of them locked in combat that would determine the fate of the territories. The Shadow Guard split, corrupted versus loyal, turning brother against brother in a conflict Catherine had tried desperately to prevent. And through it all, Seraphina advanced on Catherine with singular focus. "I have to admit, you've been more resilient than expected." Seraphina's blade sang through the air, leaving traces of darkness. "But the Covenant doesn't make weapons that fail twice. The sword was designed to kill Silentborn. Catherine felt it in the web, felt how it was forged to sever the very threads that gave her power. One cut would be fatal, would unravel her existence like pulling a thread from a tapestry." Seraphina lunged. Catherine didn't run, didn't shift, didn't fight. She listened. In that moment, with death a heartbeat away, everything Elena had taught her crystallized into perfect clarity. She felt every wolf in the chamber, felt their fear and rage and desperation. felt the mercenaries' confusion, fighting for a cause they didn't truly understand. Felt the corrupted guards' horror at what they'd been forced to become. Felt Christopher's anguish as he fought a man he'd trusted, knowing every second brought Catherine closer to death. And beneath it all, she felt the truth. They were all afraid, all alone, all fighting in the dark, convinced that power meant dominance and safety meant isolation. Catherine reached into the web, not to command, but to weave. She touched every consciousness within 100 miles, touched them gently, showing them not what she wanted, but what they could be. Showed the mercenaries that they were more than weapons. Showed the corrupted guards they could break free. Showed the Covenant's pawns that fear didn't have to be their master. Showed them all what belonging felt like. The web ignited like a star-going supernova. In perfect, devastating silence, Catherine's will expanded through the network. Not forcing, not compelling. Simply showing them a truth so fundamental, so undeniable, that reality itself had no choice but to reshape around it. Kneel. The command didn't leave her lips. It simply was, a fact of existence as immutable as gravity. 500 wolves collapsed to their knees. Mercenaries, guards, nobles watching from the galleries. Even Christopher and Matthias froze mid-combat, driven to the ground by a power that transcended alpha dominance entirely. Serafina's blade clattered from her nerveless fingers as she fell, her eyes wide with terror and awe. The chamber fell silent except for Catherine's heartbeat. She stood at the center of her web, silver light bleeding from every pore, her mark glowing like a brand. And for the first time in her entire life, Catherine spoke aloud. Not a whisper, not a plea, but a declaration that echoed through the web and the chamber simultaneously, carrying the weight of 3 centuries of silence finally broken. I am Catherine Silentborn, and you are all my pack now. The words hung in the air like a vow, like a promise, like destiny fulfilled. The Covenant magic shattered. The corrupted guards gasped as the green light died in their eyes, replaced by tears of relief. The mercenaries looked at each other in confusion, then wonder, as they felt the web weave them into something greater than fear. Matthias alone tried to resist, tried to rise, but Christopher's jaws found his throat before he could complete the movement. The traitor fell, and his thread in the web simply ended. Catherine released her hold gradually, gently. The wolves rose on shaking legs, but none moved to attack. None fled. They simply stood, feeling the web pulse with a harmony that had never existed before. Serafina remained kneeling, staring up at Catherine with something between hatred and reverence. What are you? The answer to a question you were too afraid to ask. Catherine extended her hand, not in threat, but in offering. You wanted power, wanted to matter. The Covenant promised you that through dominance. But there's another way. Serafina didn't take her hand. But she didn't refuse it, either. Christopher shifted back to human, bloodied but whole, his eyes burning with pride and love so fierce, it made Catherine's breath catch. He crossed the chamber in 3 strides and pulled her against him, his hands cradling her face like she was something precious beyond measure. Finish the ceremony, he said to the priestess, who stood trembling against the altar. Now! The rite took minutes. The bond that snapped into place between them felt like completing a sentence that had started before time began. Catherine felt Christopher's soul merge with hers, felt his strength become her strength, his purpose become her purpose. And when it was done, when they were bound for eternity, Catherine did something she'd never imagined possible. She threw back her head and howled. The sound carried not dominance, but belonging. Not conquest, but homecoming. It echoed through the fortress, through the territories, through the web itself, a proclamation that said, I am here. I am whole. I am finally home. 500 wolves answered, their voices joining hers in a chorus that shook the stars. The Silent Queen had found her voice, and the world would never be the same. Will Catherine's unity hold against the Covenant's inevitable return? Can Christopher and Catherine rule as equals, or will old prejudices tear them apart? And what happens when Elena reveals there's one more Silentborn still hiding in the shadows, one who doesn't believe in harmony? The saga continues.